Hi, it's Nick, as ever from the podcast, just popping in before the episode starts to let you know that I have a comics Kickstarter running for my new urban fantasy crime comic, And It Snowed. There'll be more details in the outro, but just for anyone who doesn't listen that far, I thought I'd get a mention in now. It's me and my Catalyst collaborator Robert Ahmed, back together at last, and yep, it's up on Kickstarter now. You can find it by going to kickstarter.nickbryan.com. That's Brian with a Y, for anyone who's never had to spell my name. Or there'll be links on my Twitter, the podcast's Twitter, the show notes, all over the place. And yep, if you've ever considered checking out my comics but not got round to it, then this is a great time to pick up both the new one and various reward tiers that let you also pick up, I think, basically all of the old ones too. Anyway, thanks so much. I will now leave you with our actual episode, during which I do not mention my Kickstarter very much, until the end.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we will be, once again, discussing a lot of Netflix content. First, we will be reviewing Project Power, a new Netflix film starring Jamie Foxx and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then discussing the new Netflix anime, Transformers: War for Cybertron. However, before all of that, Nick, have you been watching Netflix lately?
No, controversially and thematically badly, I went and watched something else instead. It's actually something I've been watching for a while, but I don't think I've done it on the podcast before. I've been watching Killjoys, the sci-fi series from the Sci-Fi Channel, which is available in the UK, also on the Sci-Fi Channel, I think. And on Amazon Prime and on Now TV. So it's nothing if not available, Killjoys. But yeah, this is a show about a group of bounty hunters in a far-flung galaxy, travelling between a few different planets in the same system, carrying out warrants, and being rough-talking, hard-living, hard-drinking badasses. It's a bit cheesy in quite a lot of ways. There's quite a lot of made-up alien names with apostrophes in them. Not alien names, to be fair. This is one of those sci-fis which focuses largely on the everything is either human or man-made approach. Although some weird stuff does start to eventually creep in. But there's definitely not, routine aliens. They don't regularly encounter alien creatures. But anyway, yeah. It's about these badasses and their bantering chemistry and the increasingly weird things they encounter. And probably primarily it's about the lead character, Dutch, played by Hannah John Kamen, who was also the baddie, the sort of ghost baddie in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Marvel fans. This is a much better part. And her mysterious past as an assassin with various holes in her memory. It's all very Wolverine. In fact, to be honest, one of the most, unique and interesting things about this show is that it does have a lead character who is a sort of morally ambiguous, violent, snide anti-hero and is a woman and is allowed to pretty much just take it on face value and be morally ambiguous, violent and snide. Aside from that, there is often a quite sort of standard sarcastic sci-fi vibe about it, but especially as the show goes along and it builds out its world a bit, especially by about the middle to end of season 2, you do sort of get surprised quite how invested you are, but also quite how complicated the continuity is. Like, when you first start watching the show, it does seem like quite a standard show about a group of sarcastic people going to different planets and either killing someone or kidnapping them, and often, finding out that it's more complicated than that and having to make a moral decision about whether to do their job for the money or do the right thing, that sort of stuff. But yeah, the mythology behind everything that's going on quickly becomes incredibly complicated and confusing, and it's often never fully explained as well. You sometimes sit down and go, wow, I've seen a season and a half of this. It feels like lots of incredibly confusing things are happening, and I'm sort of following it, but I don't quite know when this information was communicated to me, because it's actually quite complex world building. Anyway, yeah, it's okay as fun, trashy sci-fi go. The sort of snippy, weedily dialogue is sometimes a bit much. It's one of those things where literally everyone talks like that, to the extent that it actually becomes quite weird. Occasionally they meet someone new, and who's like from an alien world or part of a whole other class or something, and it's odd that they talk in exactly the same sarcastic tone. I mean, there's a bit, it's not awful writing. Like, posh people have sort of posh inflections, people have variation, but there's this sort of unity of sarcasm among an alarming percentage of the characters, which is sometimes quite bizarre. And there's the Guardians of the Galaxy thing, where they play a jolly pop song and do a fight. There's quite a lot of that. But yeah, it's fun, it's trashy. I've seen 4 and a bit seasons of it, so basically I'm a couple of episodes into the final season. In fact, we're recording this so far in advance, but by the time you hear this, I'll probably have finished it. So hopefully you can safely spoil me on social media.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Yeah, the world building sounds like it's an interesting element, because it's got quite a complex world that it's set in, but it doesn't resort to info dumping monologues.
No, it tends to just get on with it. Like, they live in this 4-planet system known as the Quad. I'm quoting the Wikipedia page directly at this stage. And each of the planets has a different personality going on. I mean, it's a bit broad in that there's sort of a posh planet, a sort of working class planet. There's this sort of prison planet. I think possibly the prison planet might be a moon, I'm not sure. But yeah, they have this sort of, these 4 planets that basically all the action takes place in. I think they very rarely leave this single system, and they've got quite a firm idea of what each of these planets is like, and then there's this mysterious other element, the one slightly weird thing that enters it, and things start to change. It is, as I say, surprisingly complicated for such an otherwise simple, straightforward, slam-bang type show.
So yeah, it does sound good. And I suppose it's kind of quite funny as well as being quite serious. I suppose it kind of walks that line that, a lot of shows do, that it's not like really po-faced. There's a sense of humour to it.
Yeah, normally about once a season they have something really sad or really shocking happens, and the show suddenly snaps to this mode of hard seriousness, which to be honest is sometimes quite jarring, but it does kind of work because you end up mostly quite liking these characters. They're well written enough and they're played by very charismatic people. One of the team is Johnny, who's played by Aaron Ashmore, who I think was in one of the X-Men films playing Iceman, I want to say.
He looks very familiar looking at the picture of him now. He's in Smallville and Warehouse 13. Yeah, quite a lot of kind of well established sort of sci-fi TV shows.
And he played Trevor in 2 episodes of The West Wing, so...
He was also in Veronica Mars.
He in particular does quite a good job of it being a sort of the slightly more sensitive, sarcastic one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a... Oh, he was him in Veronica Mars. Okay, that was a rubbish character. Okay, he's at least gone upwards then.
Yeah.
Oh, it's his identical twin brother who was Iceman in the X-Men films. I feel vaguely okay about my confusion then. Right, anyway, fun though it probably is listening to me go down a Wikipedia hole. Yeah, the 3 main actors are very charismatic, they have very good chemistry, and that does power you through quite a lot of stuff. Like, there's, you're vaguely invested in these 3 being together and having fun. Like, at the end of basically every season, the cliffhanger is that the 3 main characters have been separated, and they have to get back together so we can go back to having fun. And then that's usually the premise of the first 2 to 3 episodes of the next season. Like a lot of these shows, the amount of arc goes up exponentially as the show goes on, But the first series is relatively self-contained, and by the time you get to season 4, I think it was renewed in a single block for the last 2 seasons. They're basically doing like a 20-part serialized story. So the level of serialization has hit a bit of a high by the time I've got to this stage.
But overall, you'd recommend it as a complete 50-episode project?
Unless it completely goes to shit in the remaining 7 or 8 episodes I've got to watch. Yeah, I think so. It's fun in a very non-pretentious sort of way. It has a very, I don't know, it takes itself seriously but not too seriously. It's kind of about light for light entertainment sci-fi, in that it's not aggressively a comedy, but also it doesn't actively depress me for the most part. There's just a couple of bits every season where I'm meant to feel sad because something very bad has happened. And yeah, it's not the sort of thing I want to watch all the time, but I've been over the last few months, I've been alternating it with the more serious premium telly I've been watching, like when I caned those 2 seasons of Succession. And yeah, it's a fun way to blow off some steam, as the Killjoys themselves would probably say before they went to the bar and had 4,000 drinks. Yeah, it's good, light, easy viewing. How about you? What have you been watching?
So I've been watching another Netflix show.
Good.
Actually, I think it's not made by Netflix, unlike our 2 main reviews this episode, but it is available on Netflix in the UK. So I've been watching another Russian show called Trotsky, which you may be surprised to find out is about the life of Leon Trotsky.
I was going to say Trotsky as in Trotsky, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, Trotsky as in Trotsky because it's about Trotsky.
Okay.
And it's quite interesting. So yeah, it's a historical biography. It's a Russian-made show. It's interesting that I guess they've looked at the sort of style and approach of a lot of Western premium dramas and sort of tried to replicate that. In that, it looks fairly of a piece next to big budget, sort of shows you'd get on like Amazon Prime or Netflix. In that, it's got quite an elaborate sort of production design. Plays around with time quite a lot. The vague way it's structured is that it starts at the end of Trotsky's life when he's living in exile in Mexico, and a fictional journalist comes to... In a sense, it's not. I don't think this actually happened in real life, but this journalist comes to write a piece about Trotsky, and sort of Trotsky starts telling him his life story, and then we kind of get flashbacks, but in a sort of piecemeal way, and obviously kind of mainly weaving in the main events of the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War and the main events that Trotsky was involved in. And it's very interestingly done. It's very entertaining. Again, it's got this sort of premium TV sort of sheen to it. So it looks amazing, but I guess whoever has made it, I think, has been watching quite a lot of Game of Thrones, because there is, for some reason, like each episode has usually some fairly plot irrelevant sex scene kind of just like thrown in. I mean, especially like the opening of the first episode does hinge on a plot irrelevant sex scene. So if you do watch it, there's a quite trashy, quite rubbish, needlessly sexual opening, but it does actually get better after that. I'll put it that way.
Is this subtitles?
Yeah, there might be a dubbed version as well, but yeah, it's in Russian, and it is impressive. Yeah, the range of people they've got, especially as a lot of it takes place in Mexico. So I'm not sure where they found all these Latinx actors who can also speak Russian. But yeah, because a lot of it is obviously like Trotsky towards the end of his life, as well as all the flashbacks. I don't know. was talking to a friend about this the other day, and one thing, because I've read quite a lot about the Russian Revolution and Russian history, it's not very historically accurate. It's much more of a broad strokes history. I was talking to a friend and he said that, well, it sort of sticks to the feel of what happened rather than what actually happened, or the essence of Trotsky as a person. And it does really get across Trotsky and who he was, which is good, but it does play fast and loose with some of the events, especially if you know the period well. If you know the period based on what you're taught in school, then it's kind of sticks to the broad outline, but there's
if you're a professional Russian scholar who's read one or more books, then oh shit.
Well, I've read a reasonable stack of books about the Russian Revolution because it's the sort of thing I do when bored.
This podcast seems to be taking on an alarming tone of historical nitpicking in the last couple of episodes, Alistair.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry that pop culture does not live up to my high academic standards. I'm sorry that I have standards in truth.
Yeah, we're being mean to Netflix again, and we're sorry, and I'll do it again later, but, it's because of standards and truth.
Standards and truth, exactly, that's it. That's all I ask for is accuracy. Well, what they've done is they've simplified a lot of very, very complicated things, which I suppose would be difficult to get in. For example, they've dropped a lot of all the different kind of revolutionary factions that were sort of fighting against each other, because just to stick to the story of the revolution, the uprising against the Tsar and the government, and obviously the Mensheviks barely get a look in, and no one's talking about socialist revolutionaries or other small factions. Yeah, so they've simplified it, which, they've got to cover what is quite a long life, and it's only 8 episodes, and they've got quite a lot of stuff to get through, so they simplified it, but it depends on what your approach to watching historical TV is. If you want something that's really, really entertaining, then I 100% recommend this. I do know a lot of people who watch, especially people who mainly watch historical dramas, do really place some people, not everyone, place a really high emphasis on historical accuracy and get annoyed when TV producers play fast and loose with history to tell a slightly more entertaining story. It's whatever you want from your entertainment. If you find it distracting when you know that that's not how that happened and it takes you out of the fantasy that the show's trying to weave, I can really understand why you wouldn't like that. And I'm just saying that if that's the sort of thing that would distract from your viewing enjoyment, then I wouldn't watch this. But if you really want a sort of entertaining romp through Russian history, then do watch it.
I don't know how high up the priority list that is, but it does sound interesting. How long is it?
So it's 8 hour-long episodes. So it's not a huge commitment.
And then that's it, or?
I think that's it. I haven't quite got to the end yet, but I can tell where it's going, and he dies.
I was going to say, I'm no Russian scholar, but we're heading on a one-way trip to Ice Pick Land, aren't we?
Yeah, it's going to end with the ice pick. I'm not quite there yet, but I am enjoying it so far. But I know that's where we're heading, so... I guess because they've skipped over a lot of things, they could conceivably do a second series, but it would be just retreading the same plot with more detail. Yeah, I don't know. They could do a second series focusing on someone else, maybe. I can't imagine they'll do more, so it's not a particularly big commitment to watch these 8 episodes, but it is very entertaining. And it's part of my sort of broader program to try and watch more non-English language TV and films, because just to kind of broaden my awareness of what's out there during lockdown when we've got endless time.
Okay, fine. Make me feel bad, but I'm going to keep watching trashy American sci-fi. I did watch three seasons of Dark. Okay, and first on the podcast today, we are talking about Project Power, the latest in what seems like a series of slightly generic genre movies from Netflix, starring surprisingly famous actors. This one is about a drug which gives you superpowers for 5 minutes, and it's loose on the streets of New Orleans. And trying to stop it from 2 different angles are cop on the edge, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and military man Jamie Foxx, and caught in the middle is a street dealer played by relatively acclaimed upcoming actor Dominique Fishback. So yep, fireworks ensue, some people get super strength, some people get super speed, modestly budgeted action happens. Alistair, what did you think of this film?
So this is interesting because it's popular on Netflix. It was, I think, briefly number 1 in the Netflix chart, and it's sort of number 2 now, which in the UK. And it made me think, what would the impact of this film had been in a more normal year? And I kind of got the feeling that this is definitely the sort of film that when you went to see Black Widow or Wonder Woman 1984, this is the sort of film they'd probably put the trailer in before to make you think you like some superpowers. slightly gritty, well, there's this coming out. So yeah, and it would have been probably one of those films where I thought, yeah, that looks interesting. I'll see what the reviews are like and what I'm doing the weekend it comes out. It won't necessarily mark it down as a must-see in the cinema, but we'll see what the reception is like. But now, obviously, it's become quite popular because there's not new films coming out, or very few new films coming out, and people aren't going to the cinema. So this is, I think, having more of a moment than it might otherwise. And I think that, considering this is not necessarily something I would have leapt to see in a normal year, I'm actually really glad that I saw it because I thought it was a great, well-done film. I just thought it was very tense, well-paced, gripping, no wasted scenes. I don't think it was doing anything particularly original or breaking new ground, but I thought it was just a really entertaining sort of 2-hour action chase film. So I would recommend watching it.
Okay, I thought it was all right. I thought that in the run of Netflix action-y genre films I've mentioned, we started with Extraction, which actually was surprisingly quite good. And then Old Guard, which was good but not as good. And then Project Power, which is not as good as Old Guard. It's fine. It's one of these films which is, in my opinion, neither bad enough for me to really smugly lay into, nor good enough for me to get excited about. It has a certain visual style, it has an interesting premise, and it has some cool sort of action sequences. And I just feel like the writing, especially the sort of character writing, is a step behind all that. But on the other hand, if you do just want to veg out and watch some cool action sequences, those are there. Although they are sort of bunched towards the beginning of the film. I found it got a bit less exciting towards the end. That might just be me.
Some of the better action scenes were like the early ones, such as I think pretty much was the first major action scene when the Jamie Foxx character tracks down a drug dealer in a sort of housing project in New Orleans and chases him through this partially abandoned estate. That was actually probably one of the best scenes, and it's like the first major action scene. And there's a similar one when Joseph Gordon-Levitt chases an invisible man who's robbing a bank. Yeah, and then as it moved along, it became more of a generic people punching themselves in sort of dark rooms.
I mean, it's happened in other films as well. The film ends up being a journey from exciting action scenes out in the general world to people punching each other in like plain grey corridors on an evil base, or in this film's case, an evil boat. So yeah, it's a weird direction to go in. But yeah, it's not awful. It never seemed to really take that much advantage of the premise. Like, as Bob Chipman pointed out in his review, the 5-minute superpower concept, it's weird how it never became like a major plot point. There's shows a lot of clocks being started, but there's never a race against those clocks. There's not that many occasions where there's like a really conscious race against time, or one of them runs out at the wrong moment.
Yeah, which is actually, that's a very good point, because I was worried at the beginning. I was thinking, is every action scene going to be the same? Basically, they fight, and then the one that loses is the one whose power runs out just like a second before the others. And I thought that's going to get a bit samey after like 2 hours, but then actually weirdly they did the opposite, which is they underused that trope.
Yeah, which, as Chipman also points out, perhaps makes it hard to ignore the fact that the 5-minute superpower thing is largely perhaps a bit of a money-saving exercise. But it's what I can sort of look past, because the idea of the drug that gives you temporary superpowers is actually a coolish hook. And although it's definitely been done in comics before. In fact, I think in Marvel Comics, the equivalent drug is called mutant growth hormone, and it's scraped from mutants. Like, if you take MGH, which has been scraped from a specific mutant, you get that mutant's power. Like, there are mutants who have been selling their DNA on the black market for people to generate MGH. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Marvel continuity, but yeah, my point is, it's an interesting premise. And although it has been done in superhero comics before, it's not one that's been used to death, and therefore I felt it was a shame that it didn't necessarily go into it that much, except to have Big Pharma be the villains yet again.
Yeah, which is obviously similar to Old Guard, yeah.
Rough time for Big Pharma on Netflix. Are they really the one safe generic villain of the moment? We don't want to vilify any specific culture or nationality, but we can definitely still vilify drug company CEOs.
I think because everyone's blaming them for the opioid outbreak in America. So if the drug company's defense is, we're not bad guys, we're responsible business runners. And it's like, what about all the opioids you've been pushing on people for ages?
Yeah, or maybe it's an indication of changing attitudes to the American health system. I mean, probably not, but you never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dominique Fishback, as I say, apparently an up-and-coming actress, has a decent part. I felt like Jamie Foxx's part was a bit shallow. He has some good chemistry with Dominique Fishback, and he rides it out on charisma. It's a bit of a simple character, but it's fine. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt should honestly call his agent and ask what happened, as this is some really generic cop-on-the-edge stuff.
Yeah, one of the strengths of this film is not the characterization. I did think the Robin character, as you said, played by Dominique Fishback, is probably the strongest character in that she's given given like more than one personality trait. She's trying to help her mum, but she's dealing drugs to do it. So she's got this duality of like doing a bad thing for nice reasons, but also wants to escape and be a rap artist. And, you know, she's got a bit more personality than the more bland characters that are played by the two big stars. So yeah, the cop on the edge and the man who's been wronged and is trying to get even, which is the Jamie Foxx character. Characterization is not the strength of this film, but I did think the Robin character was actually quite interesting and probably, yeah, the best developed character in the film.
Yeah, I don't really go into a huge amount of depth, but yeah, she has some fun bits. And she and Jamie Foxx have, as I think I already said, not nice chemistry. There's a couple of good scenes between them, which did do a lot to make me feel a bit more invested in what is often a quite rushed and silly film. And there's some good stabs at sort of body horror with the powers.
The visual style is what I really liked about this film. This is not a film you've come to for, like I say, it's not doing anything particularly original, and it's not got great characters or like characters you can really like get particularly invested in. But there is a really good visual sense to it. I thought the action was very well directed. There was lots of flair. It was just, yeah, really sort of exciting to watch, especially the early ones. Some of the chase sequences were really, really sort of exciting. And I did find myself sort of gripped. And it was definitely, because it's quite a long action film. I think it's like close to 2 hours, when an hour and a half is probably more the optimum length for this. It didn't feel, I think, particularly badly paced or that it ran long. Felt like at one point I was quite surprised when like I got up to go to the toilet and I was like, oh, there's still an hour of this to go. I really thought we'd like done most of the film, because I don't mean that as a criticism. I kind of felt that like I was surprised by actually how long it is, considering how it was sort of zipping along. And the fights themselves are very entertaining. There's the special effects, although sort of used sparingly, and there is some slightly ropey CGI. Generally, it does look very good.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of nicely executed little sort of shots. Yeah, there's the scene with Jamie Foxx fighting the drug dealer. There's also a bit where, this might again be a bit of a money-saving technique, I don't know, but there's a sequence where Jamie Foxx fights a room full of drug dealers, and it's viewed entirely through the glass from inside this tank where this woman is being ripped apart by bad superpowers. And it's, yeah, might be a budget thing, I don't know, but it's very effective and very grim. So, fair enough.
Yeah, that was quite an intense scene. The film sort of pivots around a few sort of intense, quite violent vignettes, which are always entertaining. But crucially, it doesn't really like drag between them, and like the bits between each one, there's usually kind of like basically a bit of sort of condensed characterization and exposition, and then moves on to like the next action scene. There's not a lot of wastage. There's no bits feels like kind of like that was a bit pointless. Or
yeah, I must admit the nerd in me did want to see more exploration of the whole, the actual premise. But instead, it is very much just a way of getting superpowers onto the screen, isn't it? It's just an excuse to have the effects for the visuals, but not for too long, for the money.
Yeah, which is weird that they didn't use it as more of a plot device. I was a bit sort of, one of the strange things about it, I was kind of thinking like, who is this primarily aimed at? Because one of the kind of core characters, or certainly the character you see the world through, is Robin, the sort of the ordinary person who gets dragged in. But obviously the main character being sort of like a 16-year-old is one of the things that generally in like books or films or other media aimed at teenagers, you kind of age the character up a bit for the audience you're aiming for. That 14-year-olds aren't interested in reading or watching stuff about 14-year-olds. They want to see what 16, 17-year-olds are doing, because everyone wants to feel, when you're young, you always want to feel you're a bit more mature than your age. So having a kind of 16-year-old main character makes you think like, are they kind of aiming this at a sort of 14-year-olds who are off school for the summer, looking for something to do, can't go to pubs, so they'll go see this film? But also, it is much more violence than you'd expect a film aimed at 14-year-olds or whatever to do, and having a lot of focus on more grown-up characters sort of detracts from that a bit. So I was kind of thinking, like, who is the audience for this, other than people sat at home who can't go to the cinema because of COVID and are looking for any films?
I think it's just trying to hit the general cross-section between people who like sort of superhero films and people who like cop or sci-fi movies, isn't it? It's, it's very much managing to put its finger in all those pies at once, at least a little. Its finger maybe just grazing the crust in a couple of cases. Like, realistically, apart from the aesthetics of superpowers, there's not that much superhero in this. It is basically a sort of cop chase movie.
Yeah, it's not particularly, I think, aimed at people who are really into sort of superhero films, because as far as I'm aware, this isn't an adaptation of a specific comic or property. It's a wholly original work. So I think we've got to the point now that like superheroes have sort of become so much a sort of dominant, part of the cinematic landscape, like a genre in their own right, that this is just aimed at people who liked, Marvel films, but not necessarily are engaging broadly with comics and superheroes outside of Marvel films.
They definitely want people to know that this film has superpowers in it, because obviously that's a thing of the moment, and it's not as if there are any other superhero films to see. I mean, as of this moment, well, again, slightly ruined by the long delay in releasing this particular episode. As of this recording, there are a few days left before New Mutants allegedly comes out. As of this listening, you will know whether New Mutants came out and whether anyone cared. But yeah, this may not be the most superhero-y of superhero films, but it'll be the only superhero-y film a lot of people get for the middle 6 months of the year.
At least, yeah.
I mean, just over 6 months since Birds of the Prey, and the fantabulous emancipation of the Harley Quinn came out. So it's got to be, some attempts to glom onto that bandwagon, even if it becomes clear quickly that it's not really there in the actual film.
Yeah, which is in some ways more of a sort of cop crime film, in that Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Jamie Foxx are both trying to work their way to the top of a drugs syndicate and discover that there's actually a big corporation behind it.
And fight the big evil villains, 2 separate men with beards and a random woman.
Yeah, the 2 men with beards was a bit odd, as I thought we killed the beard guy, but there's another one.
I know. It's like Jamie Foxx pulls out a picture early on and goes, "I'm looking for this man with a beard," and then he kills a man with a beard, and then he gets the photo out again and says, "I still haven't found the man with a beard." Haven't you? Shit. I thought that was him, but no, it's a different beard.
There was a bit where I was basically like, I'm looking for this man, bald man with big beard. It's Shoreditch, you can find Shoreditch, loads of them, everywhere. Bald people with big beards. Just go to any kind of alternative music event in London.
So yeah, the villains are another part of this film, which, aside from their vague big pharma motivation, have not been worked on extensively.
No, that was not a major part of it. I thought it was quite interesting as well that releasing what is in many ways a cop film, it's much more of a cop film than it is a superhero film, in the age of Black Lives Matter and sort of recent things like that. I guess films take a long time to make. I don't know if this was still in production now, if they might change it around a bit, because it is, I don't know, people have been talking about copuganda. Propaganda, yeah. The idea that pop culture is propaganda for cops, and this film, it does fall into that, in that Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a character we've seen many times before, a cop who just wants to bring down some people who are unequivocally bad. He's willing to break the law, which he's supposed to be enforcing, to stop bad people and do what it takes to take some people down, which again, fuels this idea that police are the arbiters of what's good, even when they break their own rules or do things that we clearly think are bad. This film obviously does feed into that.
I mean, obviously the main answer to that is, as you said, this was probably made a long time before the current Black Lives Matter resurgence. But secondarily, this film is clearly not interested in having a deep conversation about the nature of the police. This is some of the most shallow, cop-on-the-edge shit I've seen outside of generic parody in a long time. I think he gets asked to hand over his badge and gun within about half an hour of the film starting.
Yeah.
I don't know, there are a couple of bits where he seems to be having a bit of fun, but it's not a great film for him.
He sort of also disappears from a large part in the middle of the film.
Yeah, also, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure why he's in it. If he wasn't played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I'm not sure he'd even be on the poster. He could quite easily just be the generic cop who turns up every so often to remind the audience that law enforcement exists.
Yeah, because the characterization the film has, such that it has, is very much in the middle, when it's the Robin character going from, it's a sort of fairly standard arc of going from helping the Jamie Foxx character first against her will, then reluctantly, and then teaming up with them, and they go on their little journey together and find out about who they are and little bits of characterization. And the Joseph Gordon-Levitt character basically isn't in that whole bit, so as a result he gets even less characterization and kind of disappears from a lot of the film, but then kind of comes in at the end just to be part of the ensemble for the final action scene.
There's also a really shit misdirect where Joseph Gordon-Levitt gets given a picture of the Jamie Foxx character as the baddie who needs to be taken down. I guess at that point you're meant to think, ooh, is Jamie Foxx actually a baddie? Except he's already had a flashback about his dead daughter. I've seen films, so Jamie Foxx obviously isn't a baddie. It just seems a bit...
Yeah, it was a bit of a slightly subpar misdirect.
Yeah, anyway, I could probably nitpick this all week, but yeah, I get the feeling you enjoyed it more than me. It's, as I say, it's not bad enough for me to fully have a go, but I didn't think it was great, to be honest.
Yeah, I think for me it was very much the style over substance, but it was an enjoyable style. I thought it had some flair and sort of pushed the envelope visually, whereas Old Guard maybe was slightly more sort of interesting premise. I probably had some better characterization. Did feel sometimes like it was like a quite flat.
Old Guard was a very televisual film. It felt very static. It felt very long and slow. Yeah, this was definitely a lot more visually interesting than Old Guard. It did feel a lot more cinematic and a lot more colourful.
And also, ironically, that this film probably would have actually been better to watch on a big screen when you'd have been really immersed in the visuals. But ironically, it's found an audience on Netflix because we can't go to the cinema where it's maybe best enjoyed. But that's the thing, releasing it during the warmest part of the year when cinema attendance is at its lowest, would it really have sort of sunk without a trace had it not been for the strange times we live in? Or would it be one of those things like, no, this is great? I mean, it might have come out the same week as Tenet and no one saw it.
Instead, it came out a week earlier than Tenet.
And also, it's available to people who are terrified of dying in the cinema.
Yeah, of all the places I could die, I definitely don't want to die in the cinema. Drowning under popcorn whilst people ignore me and talk over the film.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. If you're looking for something that is definitely a cinematic experience, then I'd recommend this. Yeah, I'm not saying I loved it. I just enjoyed it.
If you want to see a trashy film but will remind you a bit of going to the cinema just to see something because it's on, then yes, this is good. If I'd gone to see this of a Friday evening and then we'd gone to the pub and had a nice time afterwards, I would probably be a lot less annoyed by it. I just did feel mildly, I don't know, disgruntled at having spent 2 hours I could have spent watching something else at home on it. Okay, next up, and still on Netflix, we are covering, are you ready for this? Transformers, War for Cybertron, Chapter 1, Siege. The first in a trilogy of anime series covering the Transformers and the story of their War for Cybertron. Yes, it's about Optimus Prime fighting Megatron, and this time, rather than on Earth, and most of the plot being about Shia LaBeouf, we're on Cybertron itself, and most of the plot is about the Transformers fighting desperately for resources in the grey, scrappy remains of their planet. And yep, this is a 6-episode anime series, first part of a trilogy. We have both watched the whole thing. Alistair, what did you think?
Well, I don't want to say ruined my childhood.
Oh no.
But I didn't like this. When I was watching it, the thing that kind of occurred to me, well, the first thing that occurred to me is I didn't like it. The second was that this is probably aimed at children or younger teenagers. So I don't know what is a sort of fair standard to compare it to. I mean, I get the feeling it's darker in tone and style than the sort of 80s cartoons that I remembered growing up. And I don't know if it's aimed at a slightly older audience than they were. But even by the standard, I think, of saying this is aimed at, I don't know, a younger audience, that I think it was quite bad in that the writing is really clunky and the characterization is flat to non-existent. In terms of comparison, the characterization you get in Transformers War to Cybertron makes Project Power look like Dark in terms of deep characterization.
Yeah, that's fair. It's not great. Maybe because I don't really have much childhood association to the Transformers, I wasn't able to get that het up about it, but it's really not very good. I think the problem I have is any Transformers media has to compare to the excellent, more than meets the eye, Lost Light comic sequence that I think I've praised on this podcast at least once or twice before.
Yes, we did in the recommendation section.
Yeah, these are the comics by James Roberts from the 2010s, and they are some of my favourite comics, if not some of my favourite media full stop of that decade. And this is not really competing on that field. I briefly spoke to a friend of mine for whom Transformers are genuinely one of his main, I don't know, fandoms, I guess, and he did not like this. I thought it was slightly better than the Michael Bay films I've seen, but obviously that's not a glowing praise, but it does have a number of problems ranging from a slightly weird, stilted, serious tone, clunky animation, and incredibly stiff dialogue. I vaguely appreciate the way they're trying to, I don't know, get into the wider society of the Transformers and give Megatron something resembling a valid point, but it's not done very interestingly, to be honest, and it suffers from the problem I've had before when trying to consume Transformers media. Even when I started reading those comics, I had this problem of too many robots and not quite enough time to actually get attached. To be honest, the fact that I recognise a few of them from the comics probably helped a little, but the stilted dialogue and especially the video game cutscene animation do come close to sinking it, to be honest, especially close up. The emoting characters really aren't great.
No, it doesn't help that most of them have some kind of armoured thing over their face, so they have almost no facial expression. This is certainly, I don't know, it's better than the Michael Bay films, which are obviously famous for being pure empty spectacle. There's no real character journey or development. Bumblebee and Jetfire are the only characters who go on a journey and kind of change to any meaningful degree, in that they both join the Autobots when they're not in the Autobots at the beginning, but they're also not really the main characters. They're kind of further down the list. There is a lot of Optimus Prime and Megatron. No one really changes. There's no, even though there are, I guess, conflicts between characters, nothing really kind of like happens. There's conflict, but there's no conflict progression. It's basically like, yeah, Optimus Prime and Megatron hate each other and fight each other. Their subordinates hate each other and fight each other. Occasionally, they argue amongst themselves in their respective factions, but there's almost no like progression. Nothing ever changes. The only thing that changes is the war. Different sides make tactical advances in their struggle to defeat the other in the war, but like none of it's wedded to any character development and things like that, which make it feel like just empty spectacle.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised after watching the first episode that Bumblebee basically vanishes for most of it. Like, I was expecting him to end up being the sort of everyman protagonist, sort of, based on the early parts, but he's really not in it that much, ultimately.
Which is, yeah, again, and he does actually have like a journey of going from being like a sort of lone scavenger to joining Optimus Prime's cause, but there's not really much that sort of happens, and none of it happens because he sort of talks or interacts with other people. It happens because one of the Transformers dies and he inherits the,
Alpha Trion.
Trion protocols, which links in like nicely to like, this is full of some just really bad sci-fi writing, such as the amount of times they mention Alpha Trion protocols. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having like a sci-fi concept, you know, a sci-fi MacGuffin, or building your show around it, but it needs to mean something to the audience. Like, you need to kind of understand what these things are, why they matter, and what impact they have, rather than just saying over and over Alpha Trion protocols to the point when it's kind of become meaningless. There's just loads of like needlessly like pointless dialogue. Like, there's one bit when someone yells like, that was 10,000 stellar cycles ago. It was like, what's wrong with the word year? Like, they have years. I mean, like, I don't know, they have the concept of a truck. Why do they not have the concept of a year? So just, it kind of, the more you think about it, the more it boggles the mind. And that's on top of like a lot of heavy exposition loaded dialogue where people kind of just state their positions and just kind of say what they're thinking and why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, the opening scene kind of really does set the mold for like the whole show, in that it starts with what could be like an interesting premise of two Transformers, Bumblebee being one of them, trying to steal some Energon for the Autobots. And then they get ambushed by some Decepticons, and then Megatron turns up, and then Optimus Prime turns up. So that on paper sounds like an escalating sort of action scene, but like the Decepticons show up and they monologue about why Autobots are bad. Then Megatron shows up and he monologues about why he's a bad guy, basically. And then Optimus Prime shows up, monologues about why he's a good guy. Another point, thinking like, just someone shoots someone. Like, you're just like standing there. You're just standing there talking like only a fictional character would talk.
Like a robot in a children's cartoon.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, which is probably not what you want to be reminded of, you know, unless that's just really what 10-year-olds want for their entertainment. I'm just totally not the audience for this.
Yeah, I'm not a huge consumer of either Transformers cartoons or anime, but yeah, they didn't quite marry the serious discussion of the sci-fi concepts with, you know, like actual characterization. It's just all a bit overly po-faced and straight in a way that's quite hard to get particularly involved in. And yeah, as I say, the slightly stiff video gamey animation kind of kills it, really. I guess, I know it's, you know, an awkward time to even vaguely compliment Warren Ellis, but I get the feeling they sort of wanted to do what they did with Castlevania and sort of, you know, reintroduce the concepts and characters in a fresh new way, but it just doesn't have quite the spark they had there.
I mean, I think you're right that the po-facedness is the problem with this, in that it is like quite straight up and just kind of hard to really get like invested in. Not to praise Michael Bay, but I think, yeah, he did make a sort of reasonable decision for his very empty films to actually put some human characters in who can do some human emoting and expressing, so that at least there's something to feel like more emotionally invested in than the big robots, which I didn't just not feel particularly attached to.
Yeah, I mean, the More Than Meets the Eye comics, which I keep talking about, kind of dealt with this by writing the robots in a sort of quirky Red Dwarf way. A lot of them were slightly weird or slightly off-piste or slightly silly or strange misfits. And I guess it probably helped that it was a lot of the slightly lower brand Transformers, whereas this doesn't really have any of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, to give a non-human character like personality and stuff, but it seems like that's what the writers of More Than Meets the Eye did. Like, how are we going to invest these people with personality, which is not what they've done here, because Optimus Prime is very much a generic hero and Megatron is very much a generic villain. Like I say, they've tried to invest him with some kind of thing that he has like a cause that he's fighting for, but it is really a sub-Thanos level of villain characterization.
It's a shame, as I don't know, ever since reading those More Than Meets the Eye comics, I've been quite up for reading, you know, some more good Transformers, or watching some good Transformers, I guess, as the kids say nowadays. This ain't it, Chief.
No. Also, just a slight thing, they almost rarely transform.
They sometimes do. They need to do a bit of driving.
Yeah, but there's a lot of times when they're like walking and I'm like, you're a truck, you can drive there faster. I mean, I was slightly struck by, like, without the sort of so much transforming, this is a show just about robots. The essence of it is that, I don't know, the vehicles I felt give them a bit more, even weirdly, give them more personality. It says something about Optimus Prime that he's a truck and the Bumblebee is a sort of a lovable old bug. Whereas when they're just robots, it's just robots, even less personality.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know what the in-universe explanation is for these alien robots looking like shit that you'd find on Earth. I'm sure there is one. But yeah, I guess just sticking to the Cybertron section does slightly expose the fact that without that aspect of pretending to be things on Earth, what else is there?
Yeah, exactly.
It just becomes sort of lofty, slightly remote alien stuff, but it's hard to get that invested in.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to watch on the level that, like, you know, I'm sure you can make a good Transformers show. I mean, like you say, you've read some good Transformers comics. There is a way to make a good show. I don't think you have to introduce like human characters for us to relate to them. And one of the reasons why I wanted to watch this is I was interested to see if they do find a way to make a relatable, engaging Transformers show for the present day. But yeah, this isn't it. But I believe it's possible, but I wouldn't recommend this.
Yeah, no, probably not. Unless it's annoying. I've read some good reviews, but I assume those people just really love Transformers. Never mind.
I can't agree on everything. I would be interested to speak to someone who thought this was good and what they liked about it, as long as the argument isn't just that, like, Transformers are awesome, and, like, to acknowledge that this is bad would shatter my entire childhood and just the foundation my personality is built on.
As I say, I only know one person for whom Transformers was a foundational core text, and he did not like this, so I can't help you there.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I can't believe I spent a bit of time last episode apologising to Netflix for being mean to them. I should really have saved it for this week. However.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this Netflix-based episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please let Netflix know, as they're behind on their payments, although they probably will want to rethink that especially after the Transformers review. Sorry, Netflix. Or you can review us on iTunes so that Apple knows about us and we can get some of the sweet Apple money. Or you can go to our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where we have back issues of the podcast and written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want to follow us on social media, where you can hear a few of our latest hot takes on pop culture, plus, to be honest, probably some retweets of me plugging my Kickstarter, more on that in a second, then you can go to MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook. Just remembered I haven't plugged my Kickstarter on Facebook. And then you can get the latest updates on the show. As I said, we're recording this weeks in advance, so this one at least should be on time. And yep, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com or at nickmb on Twitter. And as I've just unsubtly mentioned, I'm also kickstarting my current comic at the moment. As of this recording, it hasn't launched yet, but when you hear this, it will be live and I will be bricking it. So if you want to make me feel slightly better, then you can go to kickstarter.nickbryan.com, or any of the links I will definitely have retweeted, and it should forward you to the Kickstarter, and then you can see the details of my new comic, And It Snowed, a urban fantasy crime story starring two people on the run from both a loan shark and Jack Frost in a sort of double chase of terror. The comic is finished, we're just looking for the money for the print and distribution, and if you'd like to get involved, you can get hold of the comic for as little as £2 for the PDF file, or £4 plus postage for the actual comic, and there's various other rewards which I will not read out to you. But yes, if you go to kickstarter.nickbryan.com or go to any of the MFV presences or my social media presences, there'll be a direct link to it there. And yes, if you are interested in comics and such, I would greatly appreciate your support in this difficult time. Thank you.
And I can say I have read the comic. Nick gave me a sneak preview and it's very good. I really liked it. To find out why it's really good, you'll have to support it and read it. Also, we'll pin a tweet with the link to the top of the MFV Twitter feed so you can find it very easily that way. And if after all that, if you want to find more from me, you can follow me on Twitter, where I'm at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Next time on Moderate Fantasy Violence, we will be reviewing the new series of The Boys from Amazon Prime, and also a new German sci-fi show on Netflix called Biohackers. Join us in 2 weeks' time to find out what we thought of those. Until then, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye. End this on that sour note, are we? Fair enough.
I've got nothing else to say that wouldn't be repeating myself.
It's okay. I think I've complained enough for 1 week.
Well, we haven't done Transformers yet. So...